Are you prepared to take the oath, Senator?
I am.
A lot of people expected our previous president, the first black president, Barack Obama. A lot of people thought that with his election, the country had turned a corner, turned a page with regard to race. But if you ask me, I think that the country has had to grapple more with the questions of race under President Trump. He gave voice to something that many of us failed to acknowledge or recognize during the Obama presidency, and that was a backlash, if you will, and a rise of resentment among a lot of white people in this country. President Trump gave voice to those people.
We've had some violent people as protesters. You know, they're not just people saying, oh, these are people that punch, these are people that are violent people. And the particular one, when I said, like to bang him, that was a very vicious, you know, he was a guy who was swinging, very loud, and then started swinging at the audience. And you know what? The audience swung back. And I thought it was very, very appropriate. He was
Donald Trump was always sort of poured gasoline on racial tensions, and it continued when he was running for office. There were signs there all along, and it wasn't just America first. It seemed to be white America first.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Donald John Trump.
President Trump came into office and he had this very kind of doom and gloom view about the state of the country, and particularly the state of crime in the country, which he felt was like out of control. He gave this very dark inaugural speech.
And the crime, and the gangs, and the drugs that have stolen too many lives and robbed our country of so much unrealized potential. This American carnage stops right here and stops right now.
And it was clear, you know, to a lot of people who he was and what he believed and how he was going to wield this divisive and racist rhetoric to gain power by whipping up a certain segment that agrees. And this whole notion that, you know, our white Christian country is being overrun by these others, these people who don't pray like us, who don't look like us, and we have to take it back and we have to stop them.
God bless America.
Trump's whole presidency was kind of unusual in that he was really willing to say and sometimes do extreme things. And on the issues of race, I think you saw that a lot, and that's why you saw moments like you did in Charlottesville.
A horrific scene in Charlottesville, Virginia, a white nationalist rally that descended into deadly violence and chaos.
There was violence in Charlottesville stemming from a white supremacist rally there, and President Trump afterwards sort of famously says that there are good people on both sides.
But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. You had people in that group, excuse me, I saw the same pictures as you did. You had people in that group that were there to
implying that there are some good white supremacists. His relationship with the racial justice community probably didn't start in a great place, and after that it was just in a horrible place. And then you combine that with some of the practical things his Justice Department did, taking a very, very aggressive stance to protesters, getting entirely out of the business of police reform. And it creates this very strained relationship between the Trump administration and the civil rights community and, you know, racial justice leaders who feel like he's far too on the side of police and not on their side.
Cities across the United States remain in a state of high tension tonight as the country braces itself for another wave of protests over the death of George Floyd.
There have been racial justice protests before. You saw it in Ferguson and in the years intervening. But after George Floyd's death, you sort of saw these protests all over the country. You know, this was one of the defining things, in addition to the pandemic, of President Trump's term. And his response was very aggressive, crackdown on these people. He really sort of came after them.
I am your president of law and order and an ally of all peaceful protesters. But in recent days, our nation has been gripped by professional anarchists, Violent mobs, arsonists, looters, criminals, rioters, Antifa, and others.
He attacked protesters. He seized on the fact that there were instances of property damage, and he made that the issue as opposed to people being concerned about, police conduct. And again, there was a rhetoric. They were terrorists, they were thugs, they were burning and looting the cities, and he wanted to bring the National Guard in, he wanted to bring the Army in. As a matter of fact, in DC, he did, employ the National Guard to clear out a park where there was a peaceful protest. So he could walk across the street and hold up a Bible at a church, sort of play acting improv.
That was really a defining moment, I think, for President Trump and his Justice Department, and how they related to social justice protesters and to law enforcement.
We're seeing protesters overcome the police. The police are now running back into the Capitol building. We have cheers from the protesters that are watching behind the scenes.
Supporters of Trump stormed the Capitol. They stormed the Capitol after having attended a rally that was headlined by the now former president.
We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved.
It was like the culmination of his weeks and weeks of insisting that the election had been stolen from him. And in his speech at the rally, then President Trump kept insisting that he'd won, and he told his supporters that we were going to go down to the Capitol and ostensibly stop the counting of these ballots and just try to overturn the election by brute force.
America, thank you all for being here. This is incredible. Thank you very much.
And as much as people talk about how systemic racism and white supremacy affects people of color, what happened on January 6th was an indication of how it affects white Americans. That somehow they felt like, no, this isn't right. You can't have this. We're taking our government back by violent force. It was really a display of white supremacy and racism that I think we haven't seen in a very long time.
We had an election that was stolen from us. We love you. You're very special. I know how you feel. But go home and go home in peace.
The last 4 years, we've had a painful conversation about race, but an honest one in many ways about race. Is this who we are? Is this who we want to be? His not being in the White House is not going to mean that, the spigot turns off and everything goes back to normal.